Star Walker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. Welcome to Season 5 of Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. Today, I set off again on the Obsidian Monolith to discuss the tabletop RPG hobby from the Game Master's perspective. So join me on the journey. Together, we can become Game Masters truly worthy of the title. Hello, listener! Greetings, fellow GM and or player. Welcome to episode 82 of Game Master's Journey, your multi-dimensional RPG podcast. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker, and I'm transmitting to you today from the Obsidian Monolith somewhere outside time and space. I want to welcome you to the first episode of Season 5 of Game Master's Journey, and welcome to 2016, everyone. Happy New Year. So I haven't quite hit the year birthday of the show yet. That comes in February, but this is the first episode of Game Master's Journey in 2016. Pretty cool stuff. I'm really excited to do some more Game Master journeying. Real quick, I want to send a shout out and a thank you to my tier 5 patron, Mr. Steve Strickland. Come on, give it up for Steve. Let's hear it for Steve. Woo! Yeah. Nice. Yeah, Steve. I keep a list of ideas for topics for the show. So I went to said list and I found some topic ideas that I think will be interesting to talk about, but don't necessarily merit or require a full episode. So I'll just hit as many of those as I can today, and we'll just kind of have a laid back, chill episode to get us going for 2016. Real quickly, I want to tell you something about the actual play episodes I've been putting out. I had a listener on Google Plus wonder if those were going to be replacing the regular content, and he was saying that, you know, he hopes not, because he's not really into actual play and he really likes the regular episodes. So my intent with the actual play episodes is that those are bonus content. So I'm still going to do a regular episode of the show every week. And that might just be a regular episode. It might be a GM 101, or it could be a world building episode. But actual play episodes will be above and beyond the regular weekly episode. Now, I did not put out a regular episode last week, and that was mainly due to the various holidays and just being super busy. So I just put out some of the actual play that I'd gotten edited, but I didn't actually record a new episode last week. But that was the exception. So I totally understand that some of you might have seen that and been like, oh crap, he's just doing actual play now, especially because I put so many of them out. But that's not what's going to happen. I'm still going to be doing the regular show every week. The actual play is just above and beyond. Now, something I'm curious about, I'd love to hear from some of you that listen to the actual play or don't, as far as what you think about the frequency of episodes and whatnot. Because what I'm doing right now is we play every week. We play 4-hour sessions. So I edit those down into about, 45 to hour long chunks, so you don't have to download this monster file that's 2 hours long. And who has 2 hours to sit and listen to a podcast at one time anyway? Unless you're listening at work. And if that's you, I envy you. I used to be able to do that. So that's what I've been doing. And so each session that we play comes out to be usually about 4 or 5 of the actual play episodes for the podcast. And what I've been doing is I edit a whole session. I have those 4 or 5 episodes in the can, and then I release them one after another, usually about one a day, until all the episodes for that session are out, thinking that, I don't want to string you along, like only put one out a week or something. For those of you that listen, you hear like an hour of the session and then you have to wait a week to see what happens next. But I do realize that will quickly lead to the feed looking like there's way more actual play than the regular episodes. And I don't know, for those of you that don't listen to the actual play episodes, I don't know if it's annoying to have 4 or 5 episodes that you're not going to download in between the episodes. So let me know if you have an opinion one way or the other. Let me know. Would you prefer that I just maybe release 1 or 2 or however many actual plays a week? Would you prefer that I not cut them into hour pieces and give you like a couple hours at a time? Or if you just have any feedback about that, just let me know. GameMastersJourney@gmail.com. Always, looking to hear from people, what works for you. I just tend to do what I would want as a listener, unless someone tells me differently, or ideally a lot of people tell me differently, right? So yeah, let me know if you have an opinion. But I'm going to keep those coming. They're not going to be coming out as fast as they have the last few weeks. I did have some extra time to work on them, but I have some new projects I'm starting now. So I'm just going to, get those out to you as I can. So, it may end up being only 1 or 2 a week, or it may end up being, I put out 4 or 5 in a given week, and then it's a few weeks before I put out more. I don't know. We'll see what people say and what people want. If you're not in the actual plays and you've been skipping those episodes, you might at the very least want to check them out and just listen to the beginning. Maybe occasionally I talk about some things at the beginning of the show, or give them a try, because unlike a lot of actual plays out there, mine are edited, so I try to edit out some of the more annoying stuff. Although I always forgot to mention it on the actual play episodes, the actual play episodes. The first session or two is kind of rough because everybody, and I mean everybody, was sick. So, I try to tell people to turn off their mic when they're coughing or sneezing or whatever. But when literally everybody in the game is sick, it's just impossible to get it all out. So I apologize if that was a little rough to listen to. But I think by the third session, which will be the next batch of episodes to come out, I think we'd gotten over our colds and flus and whatnot, if I remember right. But I don't know. That was a while ago now. So speaking of the actual play and my Primordia campaign, we are returning to the Primordia campaign this week on Thursday. So we haven't played for a couple weeks because of the holidays and just people couldn't make it. But we'll be resuming our weekly schedule this Thursday. So if you want to check us out on YouTube and watch us live while we're streaming, we play at 3:30 Pacific time in the afternoon, 3:30 p.m. Pacific time every Thursday on my YouTube channel. So you can find a link to that in the show notes at starwalkerstudios.com. All right, so enough about the actual play. Let's talk about role-playing games and whatnot. As far as me, as far as my gaming lately, I haven't actually done any gaming for the last week or so. Kind of had a break, which was actually nice, and made me realize I'm like, every once in a while, I think I should just take a week or two off of gaming altogether, because I primarily GM. So it's nice, to have a week or two of downtime every once in a while, just to kind of recharge and get some new ideas and just step away from it for a while. Of course, I didn't step away from it completely for 2 weeks. I've been working on all kinds of RP related stuff. But I've got 2 D&D campaigns going right now. I got my Thursday group that we've been gaming for going on a year now. And we're doing a new campaign in Primordia, and those are the ones in the actual play episodes. And then I have another group here in the Seattle area, and we just started playing D&D. And yeah, we play every other week. So I've got a couple games going now, and then I'm playing in a Star Wars Edge of the Empire game that also meets a couple times a month. So yeah, my gaming dance card is pretty much full at this point. Might even be a little too full. I don't know. Definitely keeping busy though. So that's good. All right. So as I said, I kind of had a few ideas for topics that I didn't feel like would be enough for like a whole episode all by themselves, but we'll see how many of these we can get through today. Just things to talk about. So the first one I have here is 2XP or not 2XP? That is the question. So depending on your game of choice, this may not be relevant to you, or it may be relevant to you. So obviously if you're playing some kind of system where there's no such thing as XP or nothing like it, then I guess this won't be terribly relevant. And I'm sorry if that's you, but hopefully that's not too many people. I think most people play and or run more than one game, so hopefully one of the games you play or run uses XP or something like it. All right, so what do I even mean by this question? So in a game like Dungeons and Dragons, where you have XP and you have levels or some form of character advancement that's tied to XP, you know, there's a few different ways you can do it, right? So I'll just use D&D for an example because it's the game everybody knows, and this discussion is very relevant to D&D because in the Dungeon Master's Guide, or maybe it's the Player's Handbook, I don't remember, one of the books, it talks about alternative ways that you can handle advancement as a dungeon master or a game master. So there's the standard, the assumed way, which is where your PCs are earning XP. So if they defeat a monster like an ogre, they get a certain amount of XP, whatever that ogre is worth. And by defeat, that could mean they fight the ogre and kill it. It could mean they fight the ogre and drive it away. It could mean they outsmart the ogre or trick it or sneak past it or something like that. And this is just a tiny little tangent here, but I see a lot of people getting hung up on thinking that because there is an XP number for a creature like an ogre, that means that you must kill the ogre to get that XP. And that is not true. In fact, it's pretty explicitly stated in the books that to earn that XP, you need to defeat the ogre, which does not mean kill it. And depending on the situation, you may not want to kill it, right? But if you overcome that obstacle, that is the ogre, in any way, you get that XP. And I know some GMs will be like, oh, well, you know, if they don't fight it, then they shouldn't get it. And I would strongly disagree with those GMs. I think if your players find a way to sneak past the ogre and not have to fight it, or they talk to the ogre and trick it or convince it to let them go without fighting, or any other clever solution that the players come up with that gets them past that ogre, maybe they teleport beyond it or dimension door or something or whatever. Anything they come up with, they should get rewarded for that, and they should get the full reward, right? They shouldn't get half or a quarter or a third. They have overcome that obstacle. And you know, one thing as a GM you want to be aware of is the messages that you are constantly sending to your players. And if you're a GM that says, oh, well, you didn't fight the ogre, so you're not going to get any XP, you basically cheated to get around it, or you're not going to get as much, right? Because it wasn't combat, then you are telling your players that you as a GM value combat, and that's the way you want them to solve the problems. And if they use any other method to solve problems, then they're either not going to get XP or they're not going to get less. So, you know, if that's what you're doing, I mean, it's your table. You can run it how you want, but then don't be wondering later why all anybody ever does is combat in your game and why they never try to find other solutions for problems. You need to reward the behavior you want to see. So anyway, off the soapbox, off that tangent. So anyway, so that's the standard way, right? PCs earn XP, and you know, you can earn XP in other ways other than just fighting monsters or overcoming monsters. And they keep a total of how much XP they have, and when they get enough, they go to the next level, right? And that's the way, most of us have done it forever. In 5th edition, they also give the option of you can do what's called milestones. And so this is basically where you as a GM, instead of tracking XP for every encounter and everything that they do, you just decide at certain points in your story where you want the PCs to level. So you might say, oh, when the PCs get through this dungeon, then they will level. Or when the PCs rescue the missing children, they'll level, or something like that. So usually it's some kind of story objective that the PCs accomplish, and then you just say, okay, you've gained a level. So that's another way you can do it. And then at the very far end of the spectrum is the GM who doesn't even bother with milestones or having any kind of logical or predetermined method or point where the PCs level, and they're just like, you level whenever I feel like you level, right? So there's a spectrum there, and different GMs fall in different points, right? Now, my goal here today is not to try to tell you what the right answer is, because I don't think there is a right answer. Honestly, it doesn't really matter that much. There are definitely much more important things to worry about and argue about than whether you hand out XP based on encounters, or you just do milestones, or you just level people when on your whim as the GM. Maybe if they bring you cookies, then they get a level or something. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. As long as you're happy with whatever method you use, and as long as your players are happy with whatever method you use, then it's all good. So I'm not here trying to tell you that there's a right way or a wrong way. I'm just going to share some thoughts, because I've seen this discussed many times, and every time I see it discussed, I'm like, that's something I could talk about on the show, and kind of where I come from on this. So I've tried both with 5th edition. I've tried the, giving out the actual XP that they earn per encounter. And I've tried the milestone method, where it's like, when you get to this point in the story, you level. And I actually did both with the Tyranny of Dragons campaign, which is one of the many problems with those books, is that in the first book, Hoard of the Dragon Queen, it tells you you can either do milestone XP or you can do encounter-based XP. And then it tells you, if you're doing milestone, these are the points at which the PCs will level, right? But then you get to the second book, Rise of Tiamat, and it's only milestone-based XP. And so much of that book is RP stuff, where it's like you'd have to figure out how much XP to give them. It's not just given to you. That it would be a huge pain in the ass to try to do that adventure anyway, other than using milestone advancement. So it's pretty lame that in the first book they give you a choice, and then in the second book they kind of shoehorn you into the milestone. I think if they were going to do that, they should have just in the first book said you should just use milestone, because what happened was I was using the regular XP method through the first book, and then we get to the second book and I'm like, oh crap, I have to use milestone now. So in the middle of my campaign, I had to switch from one to the other, which isn't ideal and didn't make me happy. But I got to try both, and they both work, and it's fine. And honestly, if you're doing a module or a published adventure, I might actually recommend just doing the milestone if that's the way the adventure is written, and if it's telling you at the end of this chapter the PC's level, because then you don't have to worry about them being the right level, and you can save a lot of math on your part in tracking XP if you just do it that way. However, I think there are some real downsides to the milestone XP method, and personally I don't use it. I'm running a Primordia campaign now. I'm doing homebrewed adventures, and I'm awarding XP for encounters, even though, I have to do a little math every session, and even during my prep to kind of know, okay, what level are they going to be by the end of this session, stuff like that. Even though, it takes a little extra time to do that, I still prefer it to the milestone method. And one of the main reasons is, personally, I see XP as a reward. Now, some GMs seem to see it as just this arbitrary thing, and I just arbitrarily give out XP, or I just arbitrarily level people when I want to, and I don't like that. As a GM, I don't like the rewards the players get to be arbitrary. I don't like the progression of the players through the game to be arbitrary. And as a player, I sure as hell don't like it to be arbitrary, right? Not a fan of the arbitrariness. I see XP as a reward. So you're faced with this monster. This monster is worth 900 XP, and you need to get past this monster to continue on whatever you're trying to do, right? So, any way you can get past that monster, from talking to it, to fighting it, to sneaking past it, whatever, but you have to get past it. And when you get past it, you get a reward, namely, your character's still alive, you get to continue the story, and you get that 900 XP, right? So, that's what I like about the XP system, is that the players are directly rewarded for what they do in the game, and they're directly rewarded proportionately to what they do in the game, right? So if you have one session and the players are just on the ball and they rocket through 5 encounters, they get 5 encounters worth of XP, which is probably going to be a pretty decent chunk of XP, right? On another night, maybe the players are just not feeling it, and they're talking about movies they saw, and they're bullshitting about things on YouTube, and in your 4-hour session, they only get through 1 encounter because they're fucking off, right? Well, then they get a lot less XP. They get about a fifth of the XP they got the week before when they went through 5 encounters. And that's what I like about the XP system. The reward that they get is directly proportionate to what they put into that session. The more they get done, the more they get rewarded. The less they get done, the less they get rewarded. And it's all black and white. It's not arbitrary. So they can't argue with the GM and say, oh, you gave us a lot less XP than last week. That's not fair. You can be like, well, because it's not arbitrary, I can tell you exactly what you got XP for and why it is fair. And why it's because of your choices that you got the amount you did. Where if I'm just arbitrarily leveling them whenever I want, and I decide, oh, this night wasn't very productive, so I'm not going to level them, it's just kind of my opinion. It's all very subjective, right? I've got nothing to back that up at all, except just, I don't feel you guys deserved it. And, then we start getting into the us versus, the GM, the players versus the GM kind of mindset. And I think that's where some of this comes from, when you have these arbitrary GMs that just, level you on their whim, and there's no system to it. There's no way that the players can predict what their rewards will be, or when they'll level or when they won't, because it's just the capricious whim of the GM, right? The other problem I have with the milestone is you really get into a mess if you have players missing sessions. Now some GMs just award XP to players who miss sessions. So if you miss a session, you get the XP just like you've been there. I don't do that. For one thing, I don't run missing players' characters as NPCs. I don't let other players run them as NPCs or as PCs. If a player misses a session, their character is not there. Okay. My sessions usually have combat, which means that every week when the players get together, they're putting their characters at risk. There's a very real chance that their character could die that week, right? So that player that isn't there, there's zero risk that player is going to die because their character isn't even there. So why should they get the same XP or even any XP as players who were there and risked their characters? Not to mention they gave up 4 hours of their day to sit with me and play a game, and they had to make decisions, they had to work together, and all those things. Again, I see XP as a reward, and if I just give that away to someone for nothing, it cheapens the reward aspect of it to everyone else that had to earn that XP. Now, I think a big reason why a lot of people do award people XP for not being there is they're worried about player characters not being the same level, right? And, you know, with some games that may be more or less of a factor, but with D&D 5th edition, I don't think it's a factor at all. First of all, when you're balancing encounters, the system can completely handle a group where every PC is a different level. It doesn't really change how you balance the encounter at all. The system can compensate for that, and you can still have balanced encounters even if every player character is a different level. The designers have said in the books that the system can handle PCs in the party, you know, being a few levels different from one another. Now, you know, if you have a large spread of, you know, level difference between your PCs, then you might get into a problem. Like we know in 5th edition, we have basically tiers of play, right? So if you have one PC that's like in the first tier and they don't even have 3rd level spells yet, and the rest of the party is in the 2nd tier, you might have a little bit more of an issue. But I think that player just needs to be a little careful. Maybe hang out in the back of the ranks, maybe not be in the front line until they catch up. And another thing is the way that the XP scales through the levels. Those players that are behind tend to catch up because each level requires more XP to advance. For the most part, there are some discrepancies, but for the most part, than the level before it, right? So, you know, if most of the party is higher level than one of the players, then in the time it takes them to gain 2 levels, that other player might gain 3 or even 4. And so what's going to happen over time is that discrepancy of levels is going to narrow, and eventually everyone's going to be within a level or so of each other. Now, I will put a caveat onto this, is I'm taking the designers at their word on this. So far in my experience running 5th edition, I think the most difference I've had between PCs in a given group are just 1 level. So I haven't yet seen it, you know, with 2 or 3 or 4 levels difference. So if you've had a group with that much of a spread, I'd love to hear from you. GameMastersJourney@gmail.com. Let me know, did it pose any difficulties or not? Now, one thing, you know, as a GM that you want to keep in mind if you're in that situation is remember that you should not throw a creature with a CR higher than the party at them. So if you have a mixed party with mixed levels, I would modify that to say you do not want to throw a creature with a CR higher than the lowest party member, right? So let's say you have a group of players and most of them are 5th level, but you've got one guy that's 4th level. I wouldn't throw CR5 creatures at that party. I would limit it to CR4 because the way the CR system works, if you throw a CR5 creature at that party and it attacks the 4th level character, it could one-shot that character. So I would avoid that. But if you do that, I think you'll be fine. And the nice thing about 5th edition is you can totally use lower challenge monsters against a higher challenge party and just have more of them. And with the bounded accuracy of the system, they can still be a threat. You know, unlike in like 2nd edition, once you're like 10 levels, you know, it didn't really matter how many goblins I threw at you. If you're 10th level, they're not going to really be a threat. But in this system, they definitely would be. So that's kind of my reasoning why I like to give XP, even though it's a little more work. And but again, you know, even me, if I'm doing a published adventure and it's set up for Milestone, then I just do the Milestone because it's just a lot easier than trying to, you know, figure it out with a published adventure. So next, I thought I'd talk a little bit about random encounters. I actually like random encounters with a great big asterisk on there. My random encounters aren't really random. So if your idea of a random encounter is we're playing D&D and you guys are traveling somewhere and I have the table of random encounters, and right there at the table while we're playing, I roll on that to see if we have an encounter, and then I roll on the table to see what the encounter is, and then I throw together this encounter and boom, there's your random encounter. Yeah, I don't do that. And I would imagine that a lot of the people that say, I don't like random encounters or I don't do random encounters, like that's what they're thinking when they hear random encounter. And you know, that's a random encounter, right? Like that's definitely a way you can do it. I wouldn't recommend doing it that way, but you can do it that way. I've seen GMs do it that way, and it often doesn't end well. So how do I do random encounters, and are they really random? So, you know, again, it depends. Am I running a published adventure or something I did myself? If I'm running a published adventure and it has random encounter tables, what I usually do is I look at the table and I cherry pick encounters that I think look cool. Okay. And then I make those encounters. So I decide, you know, how many of these creatures or whatever there are there going to be? What kind of environment are they going to be in? What treasure do they have? What weapons and equipment do they have? And I basically create the encounter just like I would create any other encounter for my homebrew game. The only difference is that I'm using the suggestion from the random encounter table as a guide as to what's in that encounter, right? And here we're talking about a combat encounter. Obviously, a good random encounter table will have more than just combat encounters on it. We'll have encounters with NPCs that may or may not be friendly, encounters with the environment, things like that. But I'm just talking about the combat stuff because that's where people sometimes get into trouble. So yeah, and then I have like, you know, I'll do a few of those, however many I think I'm going to need. And again, I'm cherry picking from the list. So any random encounter table, there's probably going to be encounters on there that you're like, oh my God, that's boring or uninspired or lame. So don't do those. Pick the ones that are cool, right? There also might be ones that are way overpowered for your party, which you can totally use those. And I recommend that you do use those. Just don't approach it as this is a combat encounter that the PCs are going to fight to overcome, right? You know, and I guess that's a whole nother can of worms is, you know, whether every challenge should scale with the PCs. And in short, my opinion, no, absolutely not. That's lame. I mean, if I want that, I'll go play World of Warcraft. PC should definitely occasionally encounter things that are way, way beyond their ability to fight and overcome. What better way to teach your players that combat is not always the answer than to throw things at them that they cannot hope to defeat in combat? I was just watching the Dawnforge Cast YouTube channel the other day, and he was on there talking about some game mastering advice, and he was going through a linear adventure that he was creating for first level characters. And one of his encounters he had was a stone giant, which is challenge 7. So he's throwing a challenge 7 encounter at his first level party. And I thought it was great. And you know, I love doing that kind of stuff too, and I'm going to do more of it after watching that video because he made a really good case about why you should have something like that in pretty much every adventure you run. So, you know, something like that, obviously you want to pick something high enough that the players aren't like, well, maybe we could take it, right? If they're level 1 and you throw a CR2 at them, even though that CR2 is probably going to wipe out the party or at least permanently kill one of the characters, if not more than one, they might think, oh, it's only CR2 or it's only an ogre. Ogres aren't that tough. We can probably take it, right? But if it's CR7, then they know, like, there's no way, right? Even on our luckiest day, even if we crit all over the place, we are not going to take a stone giant when we're level 1, right? And the other element to this that he had NPCs that were with the characters at the time that they encounter the stone giant that can tell them, you are not going to be able to defeat this. You need to find another way, right? So if you're going to do this, you definitely want to have a way to let the players know and let the characters know that they don't have a prayer and that that's not the point, that you're not expecting them to fight this thing. They're supposed to find some other way of dealing with it. And so if you have a random encounter table and you have something like that that's way too tough for the PCs, you can still use it. Just, do something like that with it. Don't expect them to fight it, and make sure that you let them know that you're not expecting them to fight it, right? If they're not smart enough to figure that out for themselves, or it may not be a thing of intelligence. It's just, what precedent have you set? If this is the first time you're doing this and every other monster they've fought, then, you need to let them know, because you've set this precedent of we just fight stuff. So you need to let them know, no, this is different. If I'm doing random encounters for a homebrew adventure, I might use like a table, like an environment table. Like say I'm in a forest, I might use an environment table of forest encounters to get ideas of what kind of things I can throw at them, but I'm not going to make an encounter table and roll on that during play. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up with a handful of encounters that I think are cool, and then during play, I will roll to see if an encounter happens, and then if one does happen, I go to my encounters I've created, I pick the one that best fits for that time and place, and I use that. Or if I don't have one that fits that time and place, I pick the one I want to use and wait for the appropriate time to spring it. So yeah, it's just, something to remember as a GM. The dice are not your boss. Whether it's the dice on a random encounter table, or if it's the dice telling you if or when an encounter happens, or any dice in the game, they are not your boss. They're there to invoke some randomness when you want to. They're there to give you some inspiration when you want to, and to keep things fair, but they're not in charge. You're in charge. So this kind of, my little example with the stone giant kind of goes into the next thing I want to cover really quickly, which is, should the players always win? No. What the fuck is this? We gonna bubble wrap everything in the world and give everybody an A no matter how shitty they did on their exam? Fuck no. You gotta earn it, baby. You gotta earn it. There's like a theme in this episode. I didn't even realize it until I'm doing it. Earn your shit, right? Don't give stuff away. Make them earn it. It's a game, right? That's what a game is all about, is earning things, accomplishing things, not just having shit handed to you. So should the players always win? No. If the players make bad decisions, bad choices, or if the dice just aren't in their favor, sometimes they lose. Then the question becomes, are your players smart enough to cut their losses and retreat or run away or surrender or negotiate a truce or whatever? Or are they just going to keep rolling dice and go down fighting but ultimately die? That's a choice you as a GM should let your players make, right? I mean, we always talk about player agency, right? Player agency is a good thing. You don't want to take away player agency. Well, here's a thought for you. If you let your PCs always win, no matter what, where's player agency? There is none. It's an illusion. It's a lie. There's no agency if they always win. If no matter what boneheaded thing they do, they come out okay, there's no agency at all. They're in the bubble-wrapped universe. There's no consequences to their actions. Why even try if they can just phone it in and succeed anyway? So I believe in rewarding my players. I believe in rewarding smart decisions and good tactics and brilliant ideas with success, and sometimes success above and beyond what I even thought was possible. And I also agree with rewarding stupid decisions or foolhardiness or the players not working together as a team with whatever that behavior deserves, whatever the outcome should be for that, right? And I'm not saying that, if I see the players do something stupid, I'm like out to get them, but, I'm going to let them enjoy the consequences of their actions, good or bad, right? I see my job as a GM as to try to be fair as fair as I can and as realistic as I can in presenting the world and environment that the PCs are against in a way, right? So if you're going to adopt this philosophy like I do, where the players can lose, there is a possibility of losing the game, right? There is a possibility of your character being killed or maimed horribly or imprisoned forever or whatever. Like, that is a possibility. That is something that can happen. Then here are some things to keep in mind and to help you out if you share this philosophy, because it can lead to some trouble, right? Everything's not going to be sunshine and roses all the time. So first of all, as a GM, you have got to be prepared for failure, right? So if failure is a real possibility, if you're not gonna, stupefy the game for your players and, create the illusion that they have choices, but they really don't because they're gonna win no matter what anyway. If you're not gonna do that, if you're gonna leave the possibility of failure on the table, then you wanna be prepared for that because it'll happen. It may happen a lot depending on your players and their luck and whatnot. So something to consider with any encounter, whether it's a combat encounter or a social encounter or an exploration encounter or any kind of encounter, right, is think about what happens if they fail, right? And plan for that, right? Don't let one failure derail your entire campaign, right? Just like you don't want to let the dice ruin your game, right? You don't want one failure on the part of the PCs to ruin your game, right? So the textbook example of this is if you're doing like some kind of murder mystery or something that the players are trying to solve, and in order to solve the mystery, they need a very important clue. There's only one way to get that clue, and they fuck it up and they don't get the clue, and now the adventure's over because there's no way that they can go forward, right? See, that's a case where you as a GM didn't anticipate the possibility that they don't get that clue, and what are you going to do if that happens, right? So I'm not saying let the PCs fail and let it ruin your game. That's not what I'm saying. If that's what I was saying, I'd be like, well, then I get you start a new campaign. So much for your murder mystery. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying let the PCs fail. Let them suffer the consequences of failure, but at the same time, don't let it ruin your game, right? So maybe in that example, maybe there's another clue they can find that will be more difficult. Maybe it will be more difficult to prove who the murderer is with this other clue than it would have been with the original clue. And again, this is something you think about ahead of time and you're ready with a plan B if they fail with plan A, right? So at least, you're not going to give them plan B, right? They got to figure it out, but at least you know how to react as a GM, right? So they're still suffering a consequence of failing because now the adventure's harder, because now they have to go find this other clue, which is harder to find, and they still have to prove the murder, which is going to be harder to do with this other clue because it's not as good as the other clue that they weren't able to get, right? So that's one way you could do it. Another way you could do it is maybe someone else finds the clue that they missed. So maybe one of the policemen or guards finds it, and it's kind of embarrassing because they're supposed to be solving the mystery, and one of the cops finds the clue instead. Or maybe there's another adventuring party that is also trying to solve the mystery, competing with the players, and maybe they find the clue, right? Again, there's consequences. There's negative consequences and complications and things that the players have to overcome now because they fucked up, right? It's not just like, oh, well, it's okay. You didn't really need the clue. Or now I'm going to put the clue wherever you happen to look, right? There's still consequences. So you want to be prepared for failure. You want to think about if the PCs fail with this whatever, whether it's a combat encounter, social encounter, or whatever, if they fail, what happens next? And if the what happens next is my campaign is over, then you want to do something about that, right? You want to have a contingency of some kind in place so that your campaign isn't over. So some ways that you could handle that is, let's say the failure is a die roll, right? So let's say they're trying to find a clue. It all comes down to an investigation roll. You want them to roll a 10. The DC's 10, and they roll an 8 or a 5 or whatever, right? They don't make it, right? So you could just say, well, you failed. Next idea, right? And that works fine if you have a contingency for what happens if they fail. And that could be really fun and see how they handle that, right? But if you don't have a contingency, or you don't like the contingency, or you just don't want them to fail at this, you could have them succeed, but with a complication of some kind. So it's like, you wanted them to roll a 10, they only rolled an 8. So you decide, well, it's good enough, I'm going to give them the clue, but because they didn't really get what I was, they didn't get the 10 that I wanted, there's going to be a complication associated with it, right? There's going to be some strings attached, right? So maybe, I don't know, maybe they end up owing an NPC a favor or some money. Maybe they have to bribe one of the cops to get access to the clue, or some kind of complication, right? So they haven't failed. They still have the clue. They can still use it, but in some way it's going to be a little more difficult for them now. Another way you could go with is, instead of a total success, they only have a partial success. So with the clue example, maybe they find the clue, but in the process of looking for it, they actually damage it somewhat, right? So maybe the clue was a footprint in the dirt, and while the PC is ham-fistedly looking for clues with his clumsy roll, he actually steps on the footprint before he notices it, and now there's only half a footprint that he has to go on. So it's going to be more difficult. Again, that's kind of like a complication, right? But a thing of, well, instead of total success, can you give them a limited success where it's enough that they can go forward, but it's not going to be as easy as it would have been if they'd gotten the whole thing, right? And then another way you can handle it is you can let them succeed completely with no complications and make them pay for it later. And you may or may not let the player know this in or out of character. That's up to you. But it could be something like, okay, you get the clue, you get to go on. There's no complications or anything like that. However, because of this is going to come back to haunt you in the future somehow, right? So there's just some ideas. I'm sure if we discussed it, we could come up with a lot of other ideas of how you can handle a failure and not let it derail your entire campaign, but still let it be a failure. All right, so I actually got through all this. So whether or not to use XP, whether or not to use random encounters, or I guess rather, how I use them. And, you might say, you know what, Lex, those aren't random encounters. And that's fair. That's a fair statement. They're not random, right? Because I'm choosing them. I'm creating them just like I do every other encounter in my game ahead of time. But they may be random in the sense that they don't necessarily have to tie into the main story, right? And that's kind of where I come at with random encounters. Is, for me, it's a way to build verisimilitude in the game. If you have an RPG campaign where everything the players do and everything that they encounter and come across directly ties into one of your storylines somehow, it feels very contrived, because it is very contrived, right? So one great way to build some verisimilitude in your campaign and make it feel more realistic is to occasionally have an encounter that just doesn't have anything to do with anything. And again, when I say encounter, that doesn't mean combat encounter. That's one type of encounter. The encounter could be with a cop that just saw you spit on the sidewalk and wants to give you a fine, right? Hopefully that won't be a combat encounter. That's going to be a social encounter, right? Or an encounter could be with a merchant that has the thing you've been looking for, but is charging way too much for it. How are you going to deal with that, right? So encounters can be anything, any kind of obstacle that your player characters have to overcome. And having some of those that don't really have anything to do with anything, just to show some of your setting and show some of the flavor of your world and things like that, are a great way to build verisimilitude and make it seem like the whole world doesn't revolve around your characters, because obviously it doesn't, right? Even though from the game perspective it kind of does, right? If that makes sense. Out of character, the game revolves around the players, but in character, it doesn't, or at least it shouldn't seem like it does, right? So yeah, not so random encounters, maybe I should say. And then finally, should the players always win? And, you know, as far as the players always winning, I mean, all the way to TPK, right? That's like the ultimate losing scenario, right? That's the end of the line. Ultimate loss is when everybody in the party bites it. It can happen. I have not had very many TPKs in my career as a GM until the last year or so. I don't know if I'm just getting more hardcore in my old age. You know, actually what I think it was is in the old days, I would fudge stuff a lot to avoid player deaths for various reasons. Most of them not good reasons. But one thing about the way I'm running my games now on Roll20 is all my rolls are public. The players see them. So that's not even really possible. Or if I fudge it, everybody's going to know, right? And then there goes any sense of tension, because they'll be like, well, you know, if someone's going to die, Lex will just fudge a roll and it'll be okay. So there's no real risk, right? Yeah, that's not very much fun. I like the risk, you know? And then the success of your party, the success of the player characters, the success of the campaign is that much sweeter because there was a real chance of failure. All right, so that is going to wrap it up for me for episode 82 of Game Master's Journey. If you would like to reach me, you can email me, gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter @LexStarWalker. You can follow me on Google+, +LexStarWalker. Please visit my website, starwalkerstudios.com, and there you can find the show notes. You can also find my other podcasts. Everything's there at starwalkerstudios.com. You can also find links to my YouTube channel if you want to check out the actual plays in the show notes, as well as all the various ways that you can support the show. Really appreciate all of the patrons, everybody who donates, everybody who leaves reviews on iTunes and Stitcher. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate people who support the show. And I really appreciate people who give me feedback and send me questions and comments and all that good stuff. Great stuff. So again, I want to wish you a happy 2016. Hope we all have a fantastic year this year. And I will be coming back soon with the final part of the second session of my Primordia campaign, another actual play episode. And yeah, just keep it coming. Keep it coming down the line, right? So I hope you have a chance to play your favorite RPG this week. I'll be back soon with another episode of Game Master's Journey. Until then, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/Game Master's Journey.